Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Commissioner Chronicles on the DLF YouTube channel. I am Nathan Powell, and I am a commissioner in the Dynasty baseball industry on Twitter, on message boards, all those fun things. And I do this series to break down different league settings, league formats, and talk about how to run them as a commissioner. Make sure to like this video and leave a not rate and review this, not a podcast. Like this video and subscribe to the DLF YouTube channel. Awesome content coming from myself, from the DLF Mailbag, Adam Wilde, and Chris Allen. Lots of great content on the DLF YouTube. Make sure you're checking it out on the daily, on the weekly. Check it out. So today on DLF Commissioner Chronicles, we are going to be covering DEVY leagues. So before we get into DEVY leagues, for people who don't know, a DEVY league is a Dynasty fantasy football league where you can select college players. So we'll go through today the different types of DEVY leagues, but in terms of the term DEVY just means college. So DEVY means that you're able to draft or auction college players. And in today's episode, we're only talking about DEVY draft leagues because surprisingly, DEVY draft leagues and DEVY auction leagues are so much more different than each other. You know, a typical Dynasty startup versus Dynasty startup auction, those are probably very similar leagues. The way a DEVY league is run in a draft league and the way a DEVY league is run in an auction league is two very different things. So I'll break them down into two different videos. So when you decide to make a DEVY league, the first decision you have to make, a DEVY draft league, is separate versus combined. What does that mean? Do you want your rookie draft separate from your DEVY draft or combined with your DEVY draft? Now, personally, I prefer them separate because I think that there is some value in having separate drafts, more action involved throughout the off season, and I just think it gets a little complicated, especially for your beginner DEVY players or even just people who are used to DEVY by itself. I don't really like to mix the two, but there are people who do, who think that it's more of a challenge to decide, okay, do I want a DEVY player or do I want a rookie player? And you can still make that same decision in a separate league. You just, by trading a DEVY pick for a rookie pick or a rookie pick for a DEVY pick. But when you combine the two, I think it gets a little bit more complicated, a little more difficult. So I guess if you want a more advanced form of DEVY, consider doing a combined rookie and DEVY draft. Next, you have separate. So when you have a separate DEVY draft, it's all by itself. You have to decide how many rounds, or in a combined, you have to decide how many DEVYs are allowed to be drafted in the draft. So this kind of depends on the level of DEVY player you have in your league, how much experience there are, and also just what you want your league to be, how deep you want the rookie draft to be, how shallow you want the rookie draft to be. That is what you use to determine how many rounds your league is. Basically, yes, people are going to trade picks, but the number of rounds to decide on average how many players do you want on each person's roster. So if you want three DEVY players on each person's roster, you make it 3 rounds. If you want 4 players on each person's roster, you make it 4 rounds. If you want 20 DEVY players on each person's roster, you make it 20 rounds. So that is the more simple part of a DEVY draft league, is that the number of rounds is just basically how many you want. So if it's a 12-team league, I would say typically in a 12-team league in your non-super deep DEVY leagues, it is either 2 rounds for 24 total DEVYs per year or 3 rounds, 36 total DEVYs per year. And I think that's even similar in auction leagues as well. Staying around that 24 to 36 number, that leaves the rookie auction not totally barren. It leaves some options during the rookie draft or rookie auction, and it allows for not having to draft freshmen every year. Some people don't really like drafting players or needing to draft players before they even play a college snap. So if you're trying to play what I would say is the intermediate form of DEVY, would be between 2 to 4. 3 is the sweet spot for me. You want a 3-round DEVY draft, and that's a perfect balance of you have enough where, okay, this is a DEVY league. You have enough invested in the DEVY format to where it matters, and not too much to where if you don't draft a player as a DEVY, you're not going to get them at all. So that's how I determine how many rounds I want in my DEVY league, is basically how experienced am I, how deep do I want the rookie draft. So that's the decision you have to make when you're doing it. And for those who are wondering, okay, what's the standard, what's the most common, I would say it is 2 rounds or 3 rounds. One thing to kind of discourage maybe a one-round Devy draft, it really doesn't end up doing much. A one-round Devy draft, it gets you that would be the most introductory of introductory. It's similar to in IDP leagues when people are like, oh, don't play an IDP league with only two starters. Don't play an IDP league with only 3 starters. That's the equivalent with a Devy league where you're only having one round of the draft. It doesn't really do much for you. Obviously, it allows you to get some skin in the game for having a one round of Devy. But if you're going to go Devy, I encourage you to at least go 2 rounds. 3 is probably what I would suggest, unless you're trying to do a beginner's format. So once you've decided how many rounds your Devy is going to be, whether it's 2, 3, 4, 18, 20, next thing you have to decide is the draft order. So in the startup year, the draft order in most leagues is determined by either you're selecting rookie picks or you're doing some draft slots, or there are, so that's pretty much the 2 that you see most often is either rookie slots or actually, no, there's 3. There's either rookie slots, there's rookie picks, or there is the players in the startup. So if you are doing the Devys in the startup, you do have to set a number. And typically that's the same number as how many rounds you will have. So if you're putting the Devy players in the startup and it's a 3-round Devy league and you want them in the startup, then you would say, okay, each person is allowed to select 3 Devys throughout this whole time. Now, this would probably typically happen in a startup after the NFL draft where rookies are also included. So if you're looking to do a Devy startup draft before the NFL draft, I would highly advise using picks or slots like you would with rookie draft picks or rookie slots. Where just that means is that you're basically picking, instead of a player, instead of A.J. Brown, you would select Devy 101. Or instead of Trevor Lawrence, you would select Devy 102. So that would be rookie picks. And then rookie slots, for those that don't know, is you select a slot. Either there's a 12-team league, there's 12 slots. Each person can take, if you take the 101, you get the 101, 201, 301, 401. And in the Devy league, that would be like you get the rookie 101, you get the Devy 101, rookie 102, rookie 201, Devy 201. So in the startup year, basically whatever you're thinking about for the rookie, kind of copy that for the Devy. So if rookies in the startup, make Devys in the startup. If rookie picks in the startup, make rookie picks in the startup. Devy picks in the startup. If it's rookie slots, then just make the rookie slot and the Devy slot the same thing. And then in future years, always for draft order, the rookie draft order and the Devy draft order is the same. Some might say, oh, it's too much of an advantage for someone to get the rookie 101, the Devy 101. The whole purpose in giving the worst team the rookie 101 is that you're making them better. And so Devy leagues just help that by, okay, they're getting that rookie 101, which is probably depleted a little bit, but also getting their Devy 101. So that it helps teams rebuild faster as long as they keep their picks. When you keep the rookie draft order and the Devy draft order the same way, the worst teams are getting the top picks in both rounds, on both formats. And just in any argument against that is, okay, how would you change it? Like, it wouldn't make sense to say, okay, the worst team gets the 101 rookie, but the last pick in the Devy doesn't really work at all, really. So keep your Devy draft order and rookie draft order the same, and obviously make those tradable. The next element of a Devy league is taxi versus no taxi. So a taxi squad is basically an extension of the active roster. These are very common in contract leagues. They're also common in Devy leagues. So with a taxi squad, basically it's an extension of your roster that in most cases you can't move players up and down. It's once a player is up, they can't go down. But there are leagues where you can move up and down. It's basically an extension of a roster. I would argue that in that scenario, might as well just make it extra roster spots. So if you're not doing a taxi, I would highly suggest, okay, let's say you're planning on doing a 25 roster league, take the number of rosters of Devy rounds that you're doing. So if you're doing a 3-round Devy league, I would say double. So if you have 25 roster spots, and this is the same thing with the taxi or no taxi, if you have 25 roster spots and you add a Devy component, and you're doing 3 rounds of Devy, then make it a 31 roster spot league, or a 25 roster spot league with 6 taxi in a 3-round league. So the reason why I suggest doubling the taxi to however many Devy rounds you have is that people are going to, and we'll get into this a little bit, people are going to draft freshmen, people are going to draft sophomores to where they're going to have to be on your roster for multiple seasons before they're in the NFL. So in order to prevent people from having to roster too much DEVY on their active roster without, obviously trading for more, then in order to do that, you have to allow extra spots. So if you have three rounds of DEVY, don't just do 3 active spots, because then people are going to end up having to have DEVYs on their active roster. It's not necessarily a bad thing, because when people trade for DEVYs, there's going to end up being people who have DEVYs on their active roster. But I think that if you want to run a DEVY league and you want to have a taxi squad, the whole point in that taxi squad is to having as much of the DEVY players on those taxi squads as possible. So make that taxi squad big enough to hold 2 years of DEVY picks, basically, and that should help you out. And then if you don't have a taxi, basically account for if you don't have the taxi, whatever you think your taxi should be, just add it to the active roster. If it's 24 and you have 24 roster spots and you don't want a taxi, make it a 30 roster spots. However many amount of rounds. Obviously, in a deeper DEVY league, in where it's like 10 rounds, 15 rounds, 20 rounds, and those you obviously have to have a much deeper taxi or just much deeper rosters in general. One thing that I would say is that for the most part in non-contract leagues, taxi squads aren't that useful, and that for the most part, especially on the commissioner standpoint, it's a lot more easy to just add roster spots than add taxi squad spots. That's something that I talked about a lot with Ryan McDowell and Scott Fish, that how useful is the taxi squad in non-contract leagues. It's fine. One thing it does do is it makes you have a young portion of your, roster. Some in a non-taxi squad space, someone could roster 31 NFL veterans if you extended the rosters, which also is a strategy in itself. Whereas the taxi squad is only rookies or only DEVYs, or you could even make it, and obviously this does create some commission work of monitoring rosters, but you can make it so your taxi squad is only for DEVYs. So once you've decided, okay, do I want a taxi? Do I want extended rosters? How do I want to facilitate having those DEVY players on my roster? The next thing you got to ask is how to make/draft DEVY players. So I'll show you a quick tutorial of how I go about doing it. So I'm going to share my screen. And so this is one of my DEVY leagues. And so if you're the commissioner, you will go to For Commissioners, Setup. You will scroll down to Edit Custom Players, and then you have to click this check mark. Obviously, all of my commission advice is always coming from the standpoint of my fantasy league, because that's the only place I host my leagues. So if I wanted to put Nathan Powell as an incoming DEVY, hot commodity on the market, Nathan Powell. So I'm going to check this rookie mark. This makes sure that people can put the player on the taxi squad spot, and you have the position. Okay, Nathan Powell, he's a quarterback. And as you can see, here are some list of the guys that are currently DEVYs in this league. And then you scroll all the way down. One thing to account, if you're in a super deep DEVY league, I'm pretty sure MFL only allows you to have 200 total custom players. So make sure that if you're doing, 10, 20 rounds, and you want to have all the players on MFL, which I think I would suggest the most. I've had a league where the DEVY players were on a spreadsheet and the trading was severely down. So if you want to have trading of DEVYs, and if you want to allow trading of DEVYs, I would highly suggest not exceeding the 200 custom players that is allowed on MFL. If they've extended that in the last couple of years, then I might be mistaken. But you put in your player name, you save it. Oh, I'm messing something up here. That would be for a DEVY option. But you still do that when it comes time to do the draft. But you tell people, okay, take a random player. So in the comment section, you'll put the DEVY player that you're selecting. And then as the commissioner, we'll go back to this. Never mind. As the commissioner, you would go into the draft and you would replace the pick with the edit custom player. And so when you replace the pick, it will say, do you want to replace, Frank Gore with Nathan Powell quarterback? Yes. So that is how you go about doing a DEVY draft, you have the people pick a replacement player, a player that, doesn't matter, will be immediately replaced by the commissioner. Have them pick that player, and then once they pick that player, you will be replacing it as commissioner. Replace pick with the custom player with the, the draft. So that is one thing. Make sure when you're doing a DEVY draft that you tell your league mates that they're drafting any player on the board, any player that's currently on MFL, because your DEVY players currently aren't on MFL. And this is the way of not exposing like who you're going to draft. The one benefit of DEVY draft league versus DEVY auction leagues is you can take a player that no one's ever heard of and they won't be able to do the research on because you'll have already drafted the player. In a DEVY auction league, I can nominate an unknown player and people can do their research and decide if they want that player or not. So I just showed you how to edit, use the edit custom player as a commissioner to create the custom player, and then you replace the pick as necessary as they're drafted. Next, in your DEVY league, is you have to decide which players are eligible. There are 3 different formats of DEVY leagues that I have seen. There are draft DEVY players. All college players are eligible. So every player from incoming freshmen, people who are going to be true freshmen that September, to obviously seniors, incoming seniors, guys who aren't going to be in the NFL draft until the following year. So that range of true freshmen to any level of senior is, the spectrum of players that will still be in college are players that are going to be selected in DEVY drafts. So if a player is going to be drafted in the NFL draft and you're having your DEVY draft before the NFL draft, then you don't pick an incoming rookie in the DEVY draft. That makes sense. So the 3 types of eligibility you have is all college. You have 1 year out. This is more on the beginner spectrum of, okay, you don't want people having to take freshmen. You don't have people take sophomores necessarily, or not at all really. You want people that are, okay, they're going to draft this player, and then next year they're going to be eligible for the NFL draft. This is often sophomores, juniors, seniors. This is more of the beginner format, but some people like it. But I think the most common format is draft all college eligible players. Now, in deep DEVY leagues and more expert type DEVY leagues, there are the all humans variation of the DEVY draft. That means that if a person is alive, you can draft them as a DEVY. Obviously, this is more common people are more commonly taking high schoolers, but some people took Arch Manning in DEVY leagues when he was like 10 years old. So I believe Arch Manning is a sophomore in high school now. Maybe he's going to be a sophomore in high school next year. And he's being drafted in many DEVY leagues that allow for drafting of all humans or drafting of all high school players. That is a level of DEVY that has to be a very deep DEVY league pretty much. And it has to be people who are knowledgeable, people who research high school, people who research even beyond high school and those camps that people attend. So out of the 3, I recommend all college the most. Recommend 1 year out if you're getting your feet wet. If you're doing that 1 round of college, that makes sense to do 1 year out. And then all humans if you are a crazy person. All right. Next, we have rules for DEVY players that are dropped. So this is a rule that I have that some people don't have. I have a rule in my leagues that DEVY players that are dropped are not eligible to be picked up. So you might ask, why is that the case? I think that oftentimes when DEVY players are dropped, it's a mistake. Not in terms of like, oh, darn, I accidentally dropped Trevor Lawrence. I think it's literally a person thinks, okay, it's okay to drop Trevor Lawrence. Literally, it happened in one of my leagues, and I was thankful that I had this rule in because if someone dropped Trevor Lawrence and then it was basically, and this is one, recommendation against first come, first serve waivers. I have first come, first serve waivers during the season between, Wednesday waivers and kickoff. But I don't want it to be a race to the waivers to get Trevor Lawrence. I don't want it to be another thing is that oftentimes when people are checking waivers, and maybe this is just, me advocating for people being lazy, but no one really ever checks no one ever scrolls through the entire thing to see, oh, did Trevor Lawrence get dropped? They are normally checking the high scores in the season, or just looking for certain players by searching them. So you're not often assuming that a DEVY player has been dropped, and so with that being the case, you don't want to basically reward the luck. And so I try to avoid that luck by not allowing for DEVY players to be added once they are dropped. They're not eligible to be added. This also helps if you are in a 2-copy league, because in a 2-copy league, you'll see every single DEVY player. If you're in a 2-copy league where only half of them are the first copies to be eligible before their rookie year, then every single DEVY can look like it can be added, and that helps where you can just say, okay, no, the only time DEVY players can be added is during the DEVY draft. Last one, and this is one that is fairly unnecessary outside the deepest of DEVY leagues, and it's rules for how many DEVYs you can roster. And once again, as far as the drop, I'm fine with allowing it. I just think that it can create some disadvantages to less experienced players. So just if a player is dropped, they're locked until the next DEVY draft. DEVY players can only be added during the DEVY draft. Rules for how many DEVYs you can roster. The only rule that I have in my DEVY leagues is that you must be able to field a lineup of NFL players. So you can trade for all the DEVY picks. You can trade for every single DEVY pick. But you have to be able to roster. So if you have a 10 lineup league, then you have to have those 10 NFL players to be able to field a lineup. And of course, you have to field a lineup regardless of buys and injuries. So if you have a 10 lineup, you probably have to have at least 14 to 16 NFL players to, avoid those bye weeks and injuries. So people just have to, they can trade for all the DEVY draft picks and trade for all the DEVYs they want. They just have to be able to field that full NFL active roster in order to avoid the tanking rules. So that should wrap us up for today's Commissioner Chronicles DEVY. Talked about separate versus combined drafts. I prefer separate, more action involved. How many rounds? I advocate for three rounds of a DEVY draft. Allows you to get deep enough into DEVY without going too deep and drafting Arch Manning. Draft order and startup, whatever you're doing for your rookies, do it for your DEVYs. And then you have taxi versus no taxi. If you don't have taxi, extend your rosters. If you have taxi, double your amount of DEVY rounds. And then if you have how to make draft DEVY players, we showed you that. What DEVY players are eligible, talked about you can do all college, 1 year out, or all humans. Rules for DEVY players that are dropped, don't like being able to add DEVY players that are dropped. And DEVYs you can roster all you want. You got to field that NFL roster. Once again, like this video and subscribe to the DLF YouTube channel. We appreciate it. #DLF. Thank you so much, and we'll talk to you guys next time.